Have you ever walked through an old city and noticed something strange? Maybe you saw windows peeking out from just above the pavement, or doors that lead to nowhere, half buried in the ground. These are not architectural quirks. They are silent monuments to a forgotten catastrophe, clues that our world has been reshaped by forces we are only beginning to understand. We are taught a neat and tidy version of our history, one that moves in a straight line from primitive beginnings to our modern age. But the evidence on the ground, in the very soil beneath our feet, tells a different story. It speaks of sudden, dramatic change, of entire cities and landscapes buried in an instant by immense flows of mud and water. These events, often dismissed as local floods or the simple accumulation of time, might be something more. They could be the fingerprints of a global phenomenon, a series of cataclysmic mud floods that occurred in our deep past. These are not the slow, gentle floods we see on the news today. We are talking about events of unimaginable scale and power, capable of depositing meters of silt, mud, and debris over vast areas, fundamentally altering the topography and burying civilizations whole. The mystery is not whether these floods happened, the geological evidence is undeniable, but when they happened, how widespread they were, and what kind of advanced societies they may have erased from our collective memory. The official narrative often struggles to explain these anomalies. Archaeologists might say that street levels rise over centuries as new layers are built upon old ones. But this slow process does not account for the sheer uniformity and depth of the sediment layers found across continents. It doesn't explain why buildings constructed with sophisticated engineering techniques are found encased in hardened mud, their lower floors perfectly preserved as if frozen in time. What we are looking at is not the gentle work of ages, but the brutal, instantaneous signature of a deluge. A deluge that forced survivors to rebuild on top of a new, higher ground level, leaving the evidence of their former world buried below. This investigation is not just about correcting the historical record. It is about understanding the true nature of our planet and the cycles of destruction and renewal that have shaped it. The stories of these great floods are not confined to geology. They are echoed in the myths and legends of almost every ancient culture on Earth. These are tales of divine anger, of a world cleansed by water, and of a handful of survivors tasked with beginning civilization anew. Could these ancient stories be more than mere fables? Could they be the distorted memories of real cataclysmic events, passed down through generations as a solemn warning of what has happened before and what could happen again? To understand the scale of these ancient catastrophes, we must first look at the science behind them. A mud flood, or more accurately a lahar or debris flow, is not simply muddy water. It's a terrifying mixture of water, rock, ash, and soil that moves with the consistency of wet concrete. These flows are dense and powerful, capable of carrying enormous boulders, uprooting entire forests, and burying everything in their path under a thick, heavy blanket of sediment. They can be triggered by several natural phenomena, each one a potent force of nature. For instance, a major volcanic eruption can instantly melt glaciers and snowcaps on a mountain, unleashing a torrent of water that gathers volcanic ash and debris as it thunders down the slopes. Another powerful trigger is a sudden extreme rainfall event, especially in areas where the soil has been destabilized by wildfires or deforestation. The water saturates the ground so quickly that the topsoil liquefies and begins to slide, creating a fast-moving river of mud. However, the most cataclysmic mud floods in our deep past were likely caused by even larger-scale events. Consider the impact of an asteroid or comet into an ice sheet or the ocean. Such an event would generate unimaginable mega-tsunamis, not of clear water, but of a slurry of seabed sediment, rock and ice, which would wash over entire continents and deposit thick layers of mud far inland, reshaping coastlines in a matter of hours. Geologists can identify the evidence of these ancient flows in the layers of the Earth. They look for what are called sedimentary deposits, layers of sand, silt, and clay that are out of place with the surrounding geology. These layers often contain a chaotic mix of materials, from tiny marine fossils to large, shattered rocks, all jumbled together. This indicates a rapid, high-energy deposition event, not the slow and orderly accumulation of sediment over millennia. When we find such layers blanketing vast regions, sometimes hundreds of feet thick, it points to a flood of almost incomprehensible magnitude, far beyond anything recorded in modern history. These are the physical scars left behind by the great deluges of the past. The mystery deepens when we consider the possibility of rapid glacial melting at the end of the last ice age, around 12,000 years ago. Geologists speak of enormous proglacial lakes, bodies of water larger than the Great Lakes combined, that were held back by immense dams of ice. As the climate warmed, these ice dams could have failed catastrophically, releasing biblical-scale floods across North America and Eurasia. These floods, known as meltwater pulses, would have been thick with the sediment scoured by the glaciers, creating continent-spanning mudflows. It is this specific period in our past that seems to hold the key, a time of immense climate upheaval where the very face of our planet was violently remade. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence for a massive, civilization-altering flood comes from the Black Sea. Today, it is a large, saltwater body, but the geological evidence tells us that this was not always the case. Around 9,500 years ago, the Black Sea was a much smaller freshwater lake, completely isolated from the Mediterranean Sea. Its shores were lower than they are today, providing fertile land for early agricultural settlements. Archaeologists have found evidence of these settlements, submerged deep beneath the current waters, the remains of houses, tools, and the traces of a lost world. These people lived in a tranquil valley, unaware of the cataclysm that was brewing just beyond the horizon. The prevailing scientific theory, proposed by geologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman, is that as the glaciers from the last ice age melted, global sea levels rose dramatically. Eventually, the waters of the Mediterranean Sea breached the narrow strip of land that is now the Bosphorus Strait, which had been acting as a natural dam. What followed was not a gentle trickle, but a cataclysmic waterfall of salt water pouring into the freshwater lake basin. The force of this deluge was staggering, estimated to be 200 times more powerful than Niagara Falls. Every single day, a volume of water equivalent to tens of cubic miles thundered into the Black Sea basin, a salty torrent that would have been terrifying to witness. The consequences for the people living on the shores of the freshwater lake would have been apocalyptic. The water level would have risen by several inches each day, relentlessly advancing and consuming their villages, farms, and hunting grounds. The flood would have been inescapable, forcing a mass migration of terrified survivors away from the rapidly expanding sea. This event would not have been a simple water flood. The incredible force of the inflow would have churned up the lake bed and surrounding soil, creating a massive mudflow that buried the old world under a thick layer of marine sediment. The once fresh lake was transformed into a salty, anoxic sea, its bottom a dead zone where nothing could live. Could this scientifically documented cataclysm be the historical source for the great flood myths that permeate the region, including the story of Noah? The timing, around 7500 BCE, fits tantalizingly with the period before the rise of the great civilizations of Mesopotamia and Egypt. The survivors of the Black Sea flood would have scattered, carrying with them the traumatic memory of a world drowned by the sea. These memories, passed down through countless generations, could easily have been transformed into the epic mythological tales we know today. The story of a world washed clean by a great flood might not be a metaphor, but a distant, powerful echo of a real geological event that forever changed the course of human history. In the vast plains of modern-day Pakistan and western India lies the ghost of a magnificent civilization. The Indus Valley Civilization, flourishing over 4,000 years ago, was one of the three great cradles of the ancient world, alongside Egypt and Mesopotamia. Its cities, like Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, were marvels of urban planning, featuring grid-like street patterns, advanced sanitation systems with covered drains, and impressive multi-story brick buildings. For a long time, the sudden decline and disappearance of this sophisticated culture was one of archaeology's greatest puzzles. There were no signs of a major invasion or widespread warfare. The cities simply seemed to empty out, and the people vanished from the historical record. The clues to their disappearance lie not in broken weapons, but in thick layers of silt and clay. Excavations at Mohenjo-daro and other sites have revealed that the cities were repeatedly ravaged by massive floods. These were not ordinary seasonal overflows of the Indus River. The evidence points to enormous sheets of water and mud that inundated entire urban centers, depositing layers of silt many feet deep. The inhabitants would painstakingly rebuild their city on top of the mud-caked ruins, raising the street levels and structures, only for another even more devastating flood to strike again. This cycle of destruction and rebuilding is etched into the very fabric of the archaeological sites. What could have caused such persistent and catastrophic flooding? Some scientists point to tectonic uplift in the region, which may have altered the course of the mighty Indus River and its tributaries, causing widespread and unpredictable inundations. It's possible that a major earthquake could have effectively dammed the river downstream, creating a vast lake that slowly rose and submerged the city in a muddy soup. When this natural dam eventually broke, the resulting outflow would have been equally destructive. Other theories suggest that drastic changes in monsoon patterns led to periods of intense, unrelenting rainfall that overwhelmed the river system and turned the plains into a muddy sea. Whatever the specific cause, the effect was clear. The civilization was slowly but surely choked by mud. The constant struggle to rebuild after each successive flood would have exhausted the resources and the will of the people. Agriculture, the foundation of their society, would have been crippled as fertile fields were buried under sterile silt. The intricate drainage systems, once a hallmark of their ingenuity, would have been rendered useless, clogged with mud. The Indus Valley civilization did not die a quick death. It was drowned slowly, buried under the relentless weight of its own river. It stands as a stark reminder that even the most advanced societies are ultimately vulnerable to the overwhelming power of nature. Off the coast of Norway, hidden beneath the waves of the Norwegian Sea, lies the scar of one of the largest landslides known to man. This is the Storegga Slide, a cataclysmic event that occurred approximately 8,200 years ago. An immense section of the continental shelf, a chunk of seafloor hundreds of miles long, suddenly gave way and collapsed into the deep ocean. The sheer volume of displaced material is hard to comprehend. It was enough to cover an area the size of Iceland in a layer of debris over 100 feet thick. This was not a slow creep. It was an instantaneous, violent failure of the Earth itself, likely triggered by an earthquake in the unstable, sediment-laden region. The immediate consequence of this colossal submarine landslide was a mega tsunami of epic proportions. A wall of water, mud, and seabed debris radiated outwards across the North Atlantic, traveling at the speed of a jet aircraft. It struck the coastlines of Norway, Scotland, and the Faroe Islands with unimaginable force. In the Shetland Islands, the wave reached heights of over 65 feet, crashing miles inland and scouring the landscape clean. This was not a clean wave of water, but a churning, destructive torrent of sediment and ocean floor, a true mud flood emerging from the sea. It would have obliterated any coastal settlements that stood in its path, leaving behind a thick blanket of marine sand and silt far from the shore. This event had a profound impact on the human geography of northern Europe. At that time, around 6200 BCE, sea levels were lower, and a vast, low-lying plain of land known as Doggerland connected Great Britain to mainland Europe. This now submerged world was a Mesolithic heartland, a fertile paradise for hunter-gatherer populations. The Storegga tsunami would have swept across this low-lying land with merciless efficiency. It's highly probable that the wave completely inundated Doggerland, wiping out its inhabitants and transforming a land bridge into the North Sea we know today. The survivors, if there were any, would have been forced to flee to higher ground, their entire world washed away in a single day. The memory of this terrifying event may have been preserved in the fragmented myths and legends of the region. Could the Storegga Slide and the drowning of Doggerland be the historical basis for some of the lost land myths of northern Europe, tales of sunken kingdoms like Lyonesse? It provides a scientifically verified cataclysm that perfectly matches the mythological template. a thriving land, a prosperous people, and a sudden, watery doom. The geological evidence is undeniable, written in the layers of sand and sediment found far inland in Scotland. It proves that our ancestors lived through world-altering natural disasters, and that the maps of our planet are not as permanent as we like to believe. Across nearly every culture and continent, our ancestors told stories of a great flood. These are not minor tales. They are central to the cosmological beliefs of countless civilizations, from the ancient Near East to the Americas. The most famous in the Western world is the biblical story of Noah, found in the book of Genesis. In this account, God sees that the world is filled with wickedness and corruption and decides to cleanse it with a deluge. He instructs one righteous man, Noah, to build a giant ark and save his family and pairs of every animal. For 40 days and 40 nights, rain falls, and the waters cover the entire earth, wiping out all life except for those safe aboard the ark. This narrative is not unique. It is a striking echo of much older Mesopotamian flood myths, most notably the Epic of Gilgamesh. In this story, the gods are angered by the noise and clamor of humanity and decide to destroy them with a flood. The god Ea, however, warns a wise man named Utnapishtim, instructing him to build a boat and save his family, craftsmen, and animals. The storm rages for 6 days and 7 nights, and the world is turned into a muddy wasteland. After the waters recede, Utnapishtim's boat comes to rest on a mountain, and he releases a dove and a raven to find dry land. The parallels to the story of Noah are too precise to be a coincidence. They point to a shared, ancient memory of a cataclysmic flood. These stories are not limited to the Middle East. The Hindu scriptures tell of Manu, a wise king who is warned by the god Vishnu, in the form of a fish, of an impending world-destroying flood. Manu builds a great ship, and Vishnu tows it to safety on a mountaintop as the waters rise. In Greek mythology, Zeus is disgusted by humanity's impiety and decides to flood the world. The Titan Prometheus warns his son Deucalion, who with his wife Pyrrha survives by building a chest and floating until the waters recede. From the Aztec tales of a fourth world destroyed by water to the indigenous legends of North America, the motif is stunningly consistent. Divine displeasure, a warning to a chosen few, a world-drowning flood, and the survival of a handful of people to repopulate the earth. The common thread in all these mythological accounts is the concept of the flood as a divine reset button. It is both a punishment for past transgressions and an opportunity for a fresh start. The world is not just destroyed, it is purified. The waters wash away the old, corrupt world, allowing a new, more righteous one to be born from the muddy aftermath. This idea of a cyclical destruction and rebirth, a cleansing of the world to make way for a new age, is a powerful and recurring theme. It suggests that our ancestors viewed these cataclysms not as random acts of nature, but as meaningful events with a profound spiritual purpose, a divine intervention in the course of human history. When we place the scientific evidence alongside the ancient myths, a fascinating picture emerges. On one hand, we have geology, which tells us about real, physical events, the Black Sea inundation, the Storager slide, the end of the Ice Age, and its megafloods. These are datable, measurable catastrophes that left scars on our planet. On the other hand, we have mythology, which preserves the human experience of these events. The myths are not scientific reports. They are stories passed down through generations, encoded with the terror, the trauma, and the meaning that our ancestors assigned to these world-shattering disasters. The two narratives are not contradictory. They are two sides of the same coin. The scientific perspective explains the how. It details the mechanisms of plate tectonics, climate change, and meltwater pulses that can trigger these massive floods. Geology gives us the cold, hard facts, the thickness of sediment layers, the chemical composition of the water, the dates of the events. The mythological perspective, however, explains the why, at least from a human point of view. For ancient peoples who did not have the tools of modern science, a world-ending flood could only be interpreted as an act of the gods. It was a direct and powerful communication from the divine realm, a judgment on the state of humanity. This interpretation gave a terrifyingly random event a sense of purpose and order. Consider the recurring theme of a chosen survivor. In the scientific narrative, survival would have been a matter of chance, being in the right place at the right time, on high enough ground to escape the rising waters. In the mythological narrative, this chance survival is transformed into a story of divine selection. Noah, Utnapishtim, and Manu are not just lucky, they are righteous. They are chosen because of their virtue, tasked with preserving the spark of life and civilization. This transforms a story of random destruction into a moral lesson about the importance of living a good life. It is a way of processing unimaginable trauma and finding hope in the aftermath of total devastation. The parallels are too strong to ignore. The geological evidence points to a period of intense global instability and catastrophic flooding around the end of the last ice age. This is precisely the time from which many of these flood myths seem to originate, a twilight period before the dawn of recorded history. The myths speak of waters covering the whole world and of boats coming to rest on mountaintops. The science speaks of sea levels rising hundreds of feet and of mega tsunamis washing over coastal plains. The myths speak of a world wiped clean. The science shows us evidence of entire landscapes and ecosystems buried under mud and silt. The myths are the human memory of the geological reality. The implications of these ancient mudfloods go far beyond geology and mythology. They force us to ask a profound and unsettling question. What if our timeline of human civilization is wrong? The Standard Model tells us that civilization began around 5,000 to 6,000 years ago in Mesopotamia and Egypt. But what if there were other advanced civilizations that existed before this, during the Ice Age, that were simply wiped from the face of the earth by these cataclysms? What if the cities we know are not the first, but merely the first we have found, built on the muddy graves of a much older, forgotten world? Consider the astonishing sophistication of sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. Dated to around 9,600 BCE, it is a complex of massive, intricately carved stone pillars built by people who were supposedly simple hunter-gatherers. It predates Stonehenge by 6,000 years and the Pyramids of Giza by 7,000 years. Yet for some unknown reason, its creators deliberately and carefully buried the entire site under tons of earth, preserving it perfectly. Was this a ritual burial, or were they protecting it from a coming catastrophe they knew was on the way? Göbekli Tepe suggests a level of astronomical knowledge and organizational skill that simply does not fit with the conventional picture of our past. It hints at a lost chapter of human history. The presence of buried cities and anomalous structures forces us to reconsider the myth of Atlantis. Plato's story of a mighty island civilization with advanced knowledge, destroyed in a single day and night of fire and earthquakes and submerged by the sea, is often dismissed as pure fiction. But what if it is another distorted memory of a real event? What if Atlantis was a real coastal or island civilization from the Ice Age, perhaps in the Atlantic, or even Doggerland or the Sunda Shelf in Southeast Asia, that was destroyed by the rising sea levels and mega tsunamis of the Younger Dryas period? The story is a perfect description of a civilization erased by a cataclysmic mud flood. We are a species with amnesia. We have forgotten a huge portion of our own story. The evidence is all around us, in the submerged ruins off the coasts of India and Japan, in the myths of a golden age destroyed by a flood, and in the mud-caked lower levels of our oldest cities. These floods acted as a great filter, erasing not just people and buildings, but knowledge. Imagine the libraries, the scientific understanding, and the technological skills that could have been lost. The survivors would have been scattered, traumatized, and forced to start again from scratch, their sophisticated knowledge reduced to fragmented memories and myths. Our history may not be a steady climb, but a story of recovery from a forgotten apocalypse. The study of ancient mud floods is more than a historical or archaeological curiosity. It is a vital and urgent lesson for our own time. We live today in an era of rapid climate change, rising sea levels, and increasingly extreme weather events. The same forces that triggered the cataclysms of the past are stirring once again. We see coastlines eroding, glaciers melting at an unprecedented rate, and once-in-a-century floods becoming a yearly occurrence. The past is sending us a clear and powerful message, a warning written in layers of ancient mud. and echoed in the myths of our ancestors. We ignore this warning at our peril. Our ancestors preserved the memory of these disasters in the most enduring way they knew how, through powerful stories. These myths of a great world-ending flood were not just meant to entertain, they were a survival guide, a way of transmitting critical information about the fragility of the world to future generations. They remind us that civilization is a thin veneer, easily washed away. They teach us that even the most powerful societies can be brought to their knees by the forces of nature. The core message is one of humility and preparedness. We are not masters of this planet. We are its temporary guests, subject to its powerful and often violent cycles of change. What can we learn from these buried worlds? We must learn to respect the geological and climatic forces that shape our planet. This means building our cities more intelligently, not on vulnerable floodplains or unstable coastlines. It means investing in early warning systems and robust infrastructure that can withstand the shocks to come. It means fostering a global sense of cooperation, because a catastrophe on one side of the world can have ripple effects that impact us all. Most importantly, it means we must not be arrogant. We cannot assume that our technology and our progress have made us immune to the kinds of disasters that destroyed the worlds of our predecessors. The mysteries of the historical mudfloods are a call to action. They compel us to look deeper into our past, to question the comfortable narratives we have been taught, and to search for the lost chapters of the human story. By uncovering these forgotten histories, we not only gain a more accurate picture of who we are and where we came from, but we also equip ourselves with the wisdom needed to navigate the uncertain future. The Earth has a long memory. The evidence of its past upheavals is all around us, waiting to be read. We must learn to listen to the whispers from our drowned worlds before they become the roar of our own.